Questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister wasted 8 months. 8 months ago, Canadians found out about the scope of Beijing's interference in helping the Liberals during 2 elections. He helped his ski buddy, who's a member of the Trudeau Foundation, in order to cover up this exact interference. Now, his reporter has stepped down. So we need a public inquiry. The Conservative Party is ready to work with all parties, including the government, in order to launch one. Will the government call a public inquiry so that we can know all of the details about Beijing's interference? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. I appreciate my colleagues' desire to work as a team, collaboratively. We've said since the beginning that a public inquiry is an option. Mr. Johnston recommended against a public inquiry and explained that decision. He explained that it would be difficult given national security matters. We are willing to discuss and collaborate with the opposition to discuss a possible public inquiry, what the mandate might be of such a commission, and what the conditions would be. And we look forward to those discussions. Mr. Speaker, David Johnston made an honourable decision in stepping down to protect people's trust in democracy. That said, he should never have been put in that position. Starting in February, both Canadians and this House began calling for a public and independent commission of inquiry into Chinese interference, an inquiry whose commissioner would be chosen by the House to study both electoral interference and the issues of financing, threats, espionage, and intimidation of the diaspora. It was the right choice and remains the right choice. Will the government establish this commission before the end of the session? Because time is ticking. The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to working with our colleague from La Prairie, his party leader, and other party leaders. We will work together in order to strengthen Canadians' trust and confidence in our democratic institutions. Mr. Johnston's stepping down gives us the opportunity to take partisan fighting down a few notches and collaborate together to work on a public process for the next few steps. We look forward to working with opposition parties to discuss how we can do so responsibly and seriously. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, for the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Johnston's departure in and of itself does not restore public trust in democracy. His regrettably botched report is the problem. He's suggested public hearings, which are merely an attempt to avoid a real inquiry. His report is proof that an independent public inquiry is absolutely essential. Today, the government is finally showing some signs of openness, which is good news for democracy, but the government must first clarify its intentions. Does it want to revive the David Johnston hearings under a new name, or is the government clearly committing to launching a true public and independent commission of inquiry? Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning of question period, that was always an option on the table. That said, I understand and we know that the Bloc Québécois will never form government. The Conservative Party knows full well that we can't have a public inquiry in some situations, such as when there are top-secret national security intelligence information involved. We cannot be irresponsible with that sort of information. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we would all benefit from a substantive discussion on the next steps of a possible public inquiry. So if there is an inquiry, we can discuss the timelines and the mandate.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 months of denials, foot-dragging and cover-ups for these Liberals when it comes to foreign interference in our election. Here's the numbers. Countless promises of protecting our democracy, hundreds of thousands to the Trudeau Foundation, one special rapporteur, and zero answers and zero results. The Prime Minister now gets to go back to the drawing board where he can keep delaying this investigation, continue his cover-up, and find someone else to do his bidding. The opposition has agreed to their new requests. When will he give up the charade and finally commit to a public inquiry?
The Honourable Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we think that a discussion about issues as important as protecting Canadian democratic institutions from unacceptable foreign interference would benefit from all of us lowering the partisan temperature. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the decision of Mr. Johnston to leave the special rapporteur's role gives all of us an opportunity to discuss what are the next steps in a public process. The opposition says they want a public inquiry. What would be the terms of reference of that inquiry? How would they protect necessary national security information in the interest of Canada? What would be the timelines? Those are the conversations we're anxious to have.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
Let's be clear, Canadians want a public inquiry. And this is the kind of thing we've been seeing for 8 months. The party who unequivocally rejected a public inquiry and ignored the will of this Parliament just weeks ago now says one has always been on the table. It should have been the first resort, not the last resort, and it's very clear they have no plan, and they never intended to investigate foreign interference in our election. When will they stop delaying this with their games and just call a public inquiry?
Hear, hear. The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, it won't surprise you that I don't share some of the exaggerated premises of our honourable colleagues' questions. What we have said, Mr. Speaker, and members of the Conservative Party know this well, including the leader of the Conservative Party, who sat in a government that was designed and decided to protect national security information from public release. They know that. So saying they want a public inquiry right now is not, in fact, a responsible suggestion. They should tell us what would be the terms of reference. How will they protect the national security interests of Canadians? Who might lead this process in a proper way?
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 31 weeks, more than 7 months, since the news that the government knew about the PRC's interference in our democracy came to light. Since then, we've asked hundreds of questions in this House and in its committees, but we've gotten very few answers. The only thing we've gotten are a few answers here and there, heavily redacted documents, and a mountain of process. NSICOP and CIRA, a special rapporteur. Will the Prime Minister commit to a public inquiry with the full powers of a public inquiry so we can get answers to exactly what happened?
The honourable minister for public safety.
Mr. Speaker, the colleague across the way highlights the mechanisms that shine a light on how it is we're protecting our democratic institutions from foreign interference, including through the creation of NSICOP, a multi-partisan endeavor, including through the creation of NSIRA. And yes, Mr. Johnston, who is now determined that he will not be carrying on, has charted out a course. What's important is that we work together, Mr. Speaker, by addressing the concerns that have been raised with regards to foreign interference, but doing so in a way that is responsible to protect our national security. That remains the commitment of this government, and we look forward to taking the next concrete steps with all members in this chamber.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, on a related national security matter concerning the Winnipeg lab breaches, it was 2.5 years ago that this House of Commons ordered the production of documents. The government refused to comply with the order, then they hid behind NSICOP, and now finally, 2.5 years later, the committee that is looking at these documents has just been stood up. Mr. Speaker, we can't wait 2.5 years for more process to unfold to get the answers we need about interference in our democracy that affects all members and all parties of this House. So, will the government commit today to a public inquiry so this democracy and Canadians across the country can get the answers they deserve about PRC interference?
The honourable government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, when Justice Iacobucci and Justice O'Connor made the recommendations about critical changes that needed to happen to make sure that parliamentarians could see into every corner of government, the Leader of the Opposition, as Minister at the time, ignored that request. In fact, if the Leader of the Opposition had his way, there would be no way to look at any national security documents. What we did in Winnipeg Labs, Mr. Speaker, is offer all of the documents to be seen at NSICOP. When they refused, we created an alternate process with a panel of independent arbiters that can look at every redaction to make sure they're legitimate. It took them nearly a year to agree to that process. They finally have. They took a long time to appoint their members. I'm glad they finally have.
The honourable député de Mégantic.
The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Why hasn't the Prime Minister already announced a public and independent inquiry into Beijing's interference? The Prime Minister has tried to cover up the help he received from the Beijing regime in the 2019 and 2021 elections. The cover-up was inventing the position of Special Rapporteur and entrusting the mandate to his friend, a member of the Trudeau Foundation. David Johnston resigned on Friday after being unable to prove beyond doubt that the appearance of a conflict of interest between him and the Prime Minister was unfounded. Will the Prime Minister launch an independent inquiry today and finally work with the opposition to ensure that Canadians can find out the whole truth? The Honourable Public Safety Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government is always ready to work with the opposition parties, including the Conservatives. However, the Conservatives continuously refuse to receive a briefing from the intelligence services. So I hope that today is an opportunity for us to truly work together with the opposition, because this matter is incredibly important. It is essential that we look into and address the threats posed by foreign interference, and we must do this work together. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. So why, though, rather than making a decision immediately after David Johnston's resignation, as he could have done, why did he not immediately announce a public independent inquiry? Instead of doing that, he sent his friend to do a media campaign. When will the Prime Minister realize that he cannot accept foreign assistance to win elections and then decide how to investigate it? His plan to hide and buy time has failed miserably, so when will he put an end to the cover-up and finally order an independent public inquiry? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, it's very telling when we say that we want to work with the opposition to collaborate on an issue as important as protecting our democratic institutions, but then my friend across the way calls that political games. There has been too much partisanship and too many political games in this matter, including from the part of the Conservatives. We are ready to work together so that we can determine the best way to move forward. We look forward to substantive discussions with the opposition. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, David Johnston was caught in a trap. From the outset, the mandate that the Prime Minister assigned him was at odds with the wishes of both the public and the House. Now that he has honorably stepped down, the government is showing signs of openness and is even calling for candidates to be put forward for an inquiry. Well, all right, the Bloc Québécois will cooperate, but the government must first clarify what kind of inquiry it will be. Will it be a public and independent commission of inquiry, or rather restricted hearings with no real power or independence? In other words, do they want the names of commissioners or the names of people to trap, like Mr. Johnston? The Honourable Public Safety Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, we have always been willing to work with the Bloc. In fact, we invited the Bloc and all members to receive briefings from intelligence services so that we could all make decisions on the same basis, being aware of the same facts and information. So we are willing to work together. All options are still on the table. We need to do this work together in order to better protect our democratic institutions. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, David Johnston's resignation puts us back to square one. For nearly 4 months, the government has been doing everything it can to avoid an inquiry. The Bloc Québécois welcomes the government's openness today, but after 4 months, the government needs to get its act together. A public and independent commission of inquiry is necessary. The commissioner must be chosen by the House and must be able to define its mandate with broad enough scope to answer all of the public's questions. Is the government prepared to launch such an inquiry before the end of the session? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect for my colleague, we are not back to square one. A lot of work has been done. there is a lot of tangible information and there has been tangible action. We have created the position of a national coordinator. We have started work on a register. There were also investments in the budget 2023 to add more resources for the RCMP and to protect Canadians. There's a host of examples of measures that we have already taken, but now we need to take this issue very seriously. We need to work in a focused way, and we are, of course, always willing to work with the opposition. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, we have been talking about this every day since February. Everyone is already calling for a public and independent commission of inquiry, including the former Director of Elections Canada, former members of intelligence services, senior civil servants, not to mention Canadians, and minorities threatened by the Chinese regime. The House, too, would like such an inquiry. Now, of course, it will be in-camera sessions, as with any commission of inquiry which deals with sensitive content. There's no lack of means to investigate. What's lacking is the government's will to investigate. So, public and independent commission of inquiry, yes or no? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, I'm encouraged by our colleagues' comments when it now, as for the type of inquiry, well, the colleague described one challenge that we face. There are top secret facts, there's top secret information here that our intelligence agencies deal with. So instead of repeating the same things, we would like to hear concrete suggestions on how we can protect sensitive top secret information. We'd also like suggestions about the type of person who would be ideal to lead these public inquiries, and also suggestions about deadlines.